To understand economic volatility, we must first deploy a filter. In times of uncertainty, there is no shortage of voices demanding your attention. To survive the noise, we must understand its architecture. The concept of signal versus noise originates in electronic engineering. The signal is the truth. It is the meaningful, relevant, and predictive data required to make a high-agency decision. The noise is the distraction. It is the random fluctuation, the unverified data, and the sensationalized filler that obscures the truth. To separate the two, we look at incentives. When an individual or an institution is incentivized to sell ideas, predictions, or media space, it benefits them to manipulate your environment. They do this by exploiting three distinct biological vulnerabilities. First, negativity bias. Your brain is wired for survival, not happiness. Evolutionary biology favored the ancestor who assumed a rustle in the bushes was a predator rather than the wind. When you see words like crisis or looming, your threat detection center activates before your rational mind can process the sentence. Second, uncertainty gap. The human brain detests a lack of control. When we notice a gap between what we know and what we need to know to feel safe, it creates acute cognitive dissonance. You are psychologically compelled to consume the noise simply to close the loop. Third, loss aversion. The pain of losing something is mathematically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining an equivalent asset. A headline promising wealth generation is easily ignored. A headline threatening your savings, your home, or your status triggers a fierce protective response. The modern information ecosystem exploits this exact loop. Trigger the threat response. Introduce high uncertainty. Offer the click as the immediate chemical relief. It is the digital equivalent of a false smoke alarm. You are forced to look just in case there is an actual fire. Once we filter out the noise of the media, we encounter a deeper problem. Finding the true signal is difficult because the global economy is not a machine. It cannot be repaired like a clock or engineered like an airplane. It behaves like a living ecosystem. The independent parts adapt in real time, making outcomes less predictable. It is a complex adaptive system. A complex adaptive system is defined by 5 distinct properties. 1. Autonomous agents. There is no master controller. The economy emerges from billions of independent individuals making localized decisions based on immediate survival needs and localized incentives. 2. Nonlinearity. In a linear system, input equals output. In a complex adaptive system, relationships are disproportionate. A massive geopolitical event might cause barely a ripple, while localized mortgage defaults in a single nation can cascade into a global systemic crisis. 3. Feedback loops. Agents do not just act, they constantly adapt to the actions of others. Positive feedback loops amplify volatility. A rumor of a bank failure causes a run on the bank, which mathematically forces the failure. Negative feedback loops stabilize volatility. Extreme oil prices force consumer conservation, lowering demand and normalizing the price. 4. Emergence. Macro-level structures appear without a blueprint. The global supply chain was never invented by a centralized committee. It emerged organically from micro-interactions between independent actors seeking optimization. 5. Continuous adaptation. The system learns in real time. Change a tax law, and corporate accounting adapts instantly. Introduce a macro shock, and businesses pivot to alternative workflows. The system evolves while you observe it. This reality destroys the illusion of control. Traditional economics often treats the market as a predictable mechanism. But in a complex adaptive system, long-term prediction is mathematically impossible. When central banks adjust interest rates, they are not turning a precise dial. They are poking a wild animal with a stick. They hope it moves forward, but it may jump backward, strike, or refuse to move at all. This structural reality leads us to an absolute conclusion. It is impossible to know when the first domino will fall, how far it will cascade, or where it will stop. Yet, the objective answer to the question remains, yes. A financial crisis is looming. It is always looming. Even in the wake of a recovery, the next destabilization is compounding beneath the surface. We cannot engineer this out of the system because we cannot engineer human nature out of the system. Economic cycles oscillate through boom and bust due to 4 invariant human traits. First, The emotional pendulum. Markets overshoot on the way up due to dopamine-driven greed and the evolutionary fear of missing out. They undershoot on the way down because loss aversion transforms caution into violent, collective panic. Second, the Minsky paradox. Extended periods of economic stability inherently breed instability. When a system is safe for too long, human complacency takes over. Banks lower lending standards, corporations accumulate structural debt, regulators fall asleep. The absence of a crisis guarantees the fragility of the next environment. Third, collective amnesia. Human beings rarely learn from history they did not personally experience. Every crisis brings promises of structural permanence and protective regulation. But across a 30-year generational shift, the individuals who carried the trauma retire. A new generation enters the system, views safety regulations as outdated restrictions on growth, removes the protections, and repeats the exact errors of their predecessors. 4. Local optimization. In a complex system, agents optimize for immediate personal survival over long-term collective health. A corporate executive who chooses systemic caution while their competitors chase high-risk, 20% returns will be removed by shareholders. Individuals will maximize short-term personal rewards today, leaving the systemic blowout for tomorrow. The ultimate irony is that our institutional attempts to mitigate minor pain often amplify systemic catastrophe. By suppressing natural, localized market corrections through artificial stabilization, we prevent the system from clearing out toxic debt. We do not eliminate risk, we store it, we allow it to compound until it erupts into an existential crisis. This review is not a prompt for pessimism, it is a baseline for strategic clarity. It is far better to know that you do not know than to be certain of something that is fundamentally unknowable. If we accept that a crisis is inevitable, but its timing is unpredictable, our objective shifts entirely. We stop attempting to predict the weather. We focus on building a resilient vessel. We do not have to invent this protocol from scratch. The great minds of history left us their notes. Consider a lesson of caution from Sir Isaac Newton. Widely considered one of the greatest scientific minds in human history, and later in life, the master of the British Mint. Despite his profound intellect, Newton succumbed to emotional contagion and lost a vast portion of his fortune during the South Sea bubble of 1720. His post-mortem of the event serves as a warning. I can calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. Intellect without systemic discipline is useless against market volatility. This structural reality was mastered by Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. They recognize that economics is not a hard science governed by fixed linear laws. It requires immense humility. Munger frequently pointed out, you have to figure out what your own aptitudes are. You have to figure out where you've got an edge, and you've got to play within your own circle of competence. Risk, as Buffett defined it, does not come from market fluctuations. Risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. Where does that leave the individual who does not possess the makeup of these two giants of finance? It leaves us with the timeless, foundational framework of Benjamin Franklin. While modern finance searches for complex algorithms, Franklin's principles offer an architecture of personal governance that protects against any macro collapse. He directed, rather go to bed supperless than rise in debt. Think what you do when you run in debt. You give to another power over your liberty. Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. He that is rich need not live sparingly, and he that can live sparingly need not be rich. Franklin's solution to structural complexity is radical simplicity. Eliminate personal leverage, keep your desires under strict governance, continually upgrade your specific craft, monitor your expenditure, and accumulate baseline liquidity. These principles are unsexy. They require deep personal accountability, but they form the exact platform required to adapt to and strengthen within an economic storm. Now, this all said, if we still want to better understand the state of the financial world at any time, there are indicators and wisdom we can glean from some of the greatest investors of our time. Who can we trust to provide indicators without a sales bias? Who actually has their own skin in the game? First, A macro valuation guide from Warren Buffett, the Buffett indicator. By comparing the total market value of all U.S. public equities to gross domestic product, this metric tests reality against speculation. When paper assets aggressively outpace real economic production, the entire system expands into unsustainable debt and hyperinflated expectations. Second, a capital allocation guide from Berkshire Hathaway. Rather than relying on forecasts, we watch where disciplined allocators commit real capital. When cash and short-term treasury reserves swell to record levels, it signals that market prices no longer offer an acceptable margin of safety for long-term compounding. Third, a guide on the debt cycle from Ray Dalio. Financial systems run on credit. As debt accumulates faster than underlying income grows, economic expansion becomes secondary to debt service burdens. Tracking where the economy sits in short and long-term debt cycles reveals whether the system is expanding or nearing a mandatory deleveraging. Fourth, a guide on collective psychology from Howard Marks. Market sentiment swings like a pendulum between unbridled optimism and extreme risk aversion. When investors treat risk as an ally rather than a threat, asset prices reflect perfection, leaving zero margin for error when reality intervenes. So where are we today? Let's look across these indicators as of the release of this video. Equity valuations sit severely detached from GDP. Smart money allocators are hoarding record cash. Debt service burdens are mounting, and investor sentiment remains enthusiastic. All in all, it currently appears the system has relatively little margin of safety. But again, these indicators still do not tell us if, when, or why a financial crisis exactly will happen. But they can guide our awareness to the current risks and inform better decisions across time. To summarize, you do not know when the next economic crisis will occur. No one does. But by managing your personal liabilities, defending your liberty, and operating with absolute prudence, you position your strategy to handle both systemic risk and sudden opportunity. Like most of life, the answer is complex and dynamic. So leverage the knowledge of great minds and implement their timeless principles. Learn more and build your framework at strategyofone.com. Useful readings: Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman; Poor Charlie's Almanack, Charlie Munger; Consilience, Edward O. Wilson; Filters Against Folly, Garrett Hardin; Fooled by Randomness, Nassim Nicholas Taleb; Manias, Panics, and Crashes, Charles P. Kindleberger; This Time is Different, Carmen M. Reinhart and Kenneth S. Rogoff; The Snowball, Alice Schroeder; Poor Richard's Almanack, Benjamin Franklin; Big Debt Crises, Ray Dalio; and Mastering the Market Cycle, Howard Marks.